And hello, everybody, and welcome to the IBM TV network. My name is Nick Palavita, and today we're going to have a very exciting lineup and a very exciting things we're going to be discussing today, which looks like, let me go look at our discussion topics. Oops, spelled wrong. We're going to talk about banned books, but let me introduce some of our panelists that are going to be here today. First of all, a very famous author, co-author of the book, The Millionaire Next Door, and also Richer Than a Millionaire. Let's welcome to the show Bill Danko. Bill, welcome back to the show.
Thank you.
Good to have you here. Yeah. We're going to talk about books today, which is a pretty exciting topic. And also a journalism major and also a producer of IBM TV. Let's bring in Mark Lee. Mark, welcome to the show. Yes, good to have you here.
Always good to be here.
And we're going to be joined by other people, but they're backstage right now. And now the thing is, the issue we're going to discuss today on Media Monday is this one, a very exciting issue, I think, because I didn't know it was as prevalent as it really sounds. It's called banned books. In other words, the thing is, apparently it's a big topic that there are books out there that are banned. And some of the books are books that I've read, and I was going, why are they banned? Like Huckleberry Finn, Catcher in the Rye, I mean, To Kill a Mockingbird. There's a whole list of them that are banned. And I was going, are you serious? These books, you can't read them if you want to read them. So what are your thoughts, Bill Danko? I know you have the book, The Millionaire Next Door, Richer Than a Millionaire. What happens if somebody decides, oh, wait, these are going to show people how to become successful. Let's ban these books.
That's tragically possible.
Right.
I mean, you look at some repressive countries that have banned the Bible and the Quran. I mean, I would hate to be in a society. I would hate to be in a society that had that draconian approach. And so I'm interested in learning more about these current banned books. I mean, is it just part of this political correctness thing? Or if it really gets serious and we start burning books and just prohibiting,
right.
That's draconian.
Yeah, Mark, I don't know if you've seen this, but the thing is, there are a lot of books that are banned. I don't know if I didn't even know it existed until like a couple months ago. I was thinking, wait, is this the United States of America that we ban books like you shan't read this book because we'll take it away from the libraries. We're going to basically burn it. Mark, you were a journalism major. Did they even teach you about banned books? It's like news to me. I don't know which book I have back there.
I knew that there were definitely books that were banned, and sometimes they were banned because of their viewpoints or their things that they were putting in the storylines and things of that nature. But, some of these books have become very much classics and all of that because, many of us know that there is a famous poet who passed away many years ago, or actually, probably about a few years ago now that I'm thinking about the timeline and everything. But that was the amazing poet Maya Angelou. And her book, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, was one of those books that was banned. And it was banned and challenged because of its views around homosexuality, offensive language, racism, being sexually explicit, violence, and being unsuited for certain age groups and all of that. Which, Maya is definitely known as a classic person and all of that. Another book that I know a lot of people have read in the past that has still been banned and sometimes is a book called Slaughterhouse-Five by Kurt Vonnegut. And the reason that it was banned and challenged was because of obscene language. I mean, and that's up to your definition of what is obscene might be different from mine. I remember there was a famous quote about, what is a definition even of pornography, because some people may see it as one thing and others may see it in another light, but definitely it was banned because of obscene language, depictions of sexual acts, lack of patriotism. And, one person's patriot is another person's rebel, being anti-Christian, being anti-Semitic, and because of its views around homosexuality as well. And another book that a lot of people have read in their definitely in their collection of books that they probably have, I think I've got a copy of it somewhere, is To Kill a Mockingbird. And the reason it was banned and challenged was because of racism, racial slurs, featuring a quote unquote white savior character violence, offensive language, its perception of the Black experience, and being unsuited to a particular age group. So sometimes these books are banned because they are seen as not being suited for an age group. And to come to Bill's standpoint, yes, there are some more recent books. Like I know that one of the books that Ibrahim X put out definitely has some views that some people may consider to be part of critical race theory or things along those lines. And those books have been placed on ban lists, as has the book that was written by Sherman Alexie that was called The Absolutely True Diary of a Part-Time Indian. And the reason it was banned and challenged for profanity, sexual references, poverty, alcoholism, violence, gambling, underage drinking, anti-family, cultural insensitivity, religious viewpoints, and allegations of sexual misconduct by the author. So definitely those are some of the reasons.
Mark, who is the authority that bans these things? I mean, who's the arbiter?
I mean, it can vary. A lot of times it is the individual, like school boards have done it. Sometimes it is done by library organizations. There are different people that have put it out there in the sense of banning them. A lot of times the fights come up in the community, but a lot of times they are done by one of the things we talked about on this show is knowing what, not just depending on the federal people and the federal government, but also paying attention to what your local government and your regional and state government are doing. And a lot of these organizations are actually in that state system. So they are like different libraries that are doing this, different school systems and things along those lines. So we actually have to pay attention to those kind of localized things in order to even find out where the books are banned and how they are being banned and all of that. The ALA, the American Library Association, does do a good job of keeping track of who some of these books are and even some of the reasons for these books being banned, and gives a little bit of report on that. But that's what I think finds out is a lot of times these are done on a local level. And unless somebody that is locally there comes back and raises a ruckus about it, a lot of times we don't even hear about it until doing the research and looking for where these banned books are at. But a lot of times it is local people, and sometimes it's even being banned by the nature of the schools, because you know we have different kinds of schools. So there are certain schools that might be banning books more than others because it doesn't quite fit into their curriculum. Whether that's a charter school that might be geared more toward the African American community, whether that's a religious school, whether that's a number of other reasons that they might be banning these books because they don't quite fall within the constraints of what they would like to be teaching.
Yeah. Bill, did you ever run across that? In other words, like you taught at university level. Did your university ever say, this is a list of books that we're going to ban from the library?
No, not in the 31 years that I was teaching there.
Okay.
That has never been the case, really. It's
right.
So I don't know how much momentum there is to this movement right now about banning. I mean, people with a microphone or a megaphone, and they're shouting loud enough about certain books, maybe they'll get their way. But
I just find it. I was like shocked that there's today in the United States of America, there's groups out there that are banning books, and I said, well, let's go to Australia because I don't know what goes down under. You know, that's like thousands of miles away. Shaquille, do you guys have books that are banned that you're not allowed to read?
How would I know? I don't live here.
What? I thought you're in Sydney.
Yeah, I'm in Sydney, but I don't live here.
Oh, you don't live there
because of COVID and the fact that Australian citizens were recalled to Australia, and we've been locked up ever since in our colony that in our big prison camp that England bestowed upon us. But look, to the issue of banning or censoring books, in the examples that Mark's using, I can somewhat understand why local parents may not want young children exposed to some information at too early an age, whether that be, racial issues, which seem to be a big deal at the moment, and issues around sexuality and sexual expression. There are a lot of people on the conservative right that will say, look, we don't want our kids exposed to, sexual issues just yet. We can introduce these subjects to them later. Or these are attacking family values. We don't want these views put out there just yet. And there are other people within the community, normally on the political left, that will say, we need books that are going to be inclusive of all of these different people and not be quite so racially charged. But the idea of banning a book at all, I think, is, it's a disservice. It actually sets us backwards. And I think really one of history's most contentious books would be Mein Kampf by that horrible person.
Yeah.
And it's not that I would say, hey, you need to race out and buy that book, right? I'm not ever going to suggest that. But if you're somebody who's studying politics, or you're somebody who really wants to understand what happened during that time and what the motivations were, it's kind of an important thing to be able to access so that you can read it. Now, I don't know anybody who's read it who thinks that, it's a very well-written piece of prose. It's incoherent. Right. It's just drivel. But it gives us a very interesting insight into his mindset and the people around him. And so, it's an important thing for us to learn about some of the things in our history that has been really horrible, so that we don't repeat those, we don't repeat those mistakes. And certainly if I ever have children, people will think that I'm obviously very capitalist. But, I've read a lot of Karl Marx's books, and I found them to be very insightful. I don't agree with the political points or the philosophical points that he brings up, but I'd want my children to learn those, as well as learning, other mainstream economists, so that they can kind of work out the pros and cons for themselves. I would hope that they would draw the same conclusions as I do. But, I think that all these sorts of ideas and being exposed to these ideas are important. But even if I didn't, even if for some reason I or somebody else wanted to buy a book that I really strongly disagree with, by what right, as Bill said, by what right do I have to stop them from doing so? Mm-hmm. The Anarchist Cookbook is the other one that I know has been very, very restricted over the years. Mm-hmm. You could probably, in that case, make the argument that it's a dangerous book because it actually sets out, and I've never read it, so I don't actually know, but from what I understand, it actually sets out how to let off pipe bombs and all these sorts of things. So in that kind of environment, yeah, maybe, those sorts of things, the government has the right to restrict those sorts of books, like you would restrict somebody from learning how to create a nuclear bomb. Like, of course, we don't want anybody to be able to access that sort of material. But as a general rule, to just block something because we don't like the idea, or we don't like something that's described in the book or something like that, if you don't like it, don't read it.
Yeah.
The liberals of yesterday, they were big defenders of media when The Life of Brian came out, and the religious right were up in arms about the Life of Brian and how Jesus was portrayed in a sort of parody by the Monty Python crew. But the idea of being in a liberal society is that everybody can see what they want to see and not see what they don't want to see.
Right. I totally agree with you and everything.
Yeah, you know what I found, because I bought and read Mein Kampf a long time ago, which means my struggle. And what I found more fascinating about that book than anything is that he already said what he was going to do, which was to do ethnic cleansing. I mean, it's all throughout the book. In other words, the guy was kind of a nutcase. But what got me is he wrote a book about it before he actually did it. And so it scares the bejeevers out of me when a politician writes a book and you plan on voting for him, you better read the book, because they're kind of serious about that stuff. And he was pretty serious. But then I did see that it was one of the banned books, and I'm going like, well, why would you ban it? It's kind of like, and I agree with you, it kind of rambles on, this, that, and the other thing that he discusses.
Wait a minute. Hold on a second.
Right.
You expect people to actually understand what they are looking at and all of that? I mean, I am definitely a fan of freedom of speech and definitely all of that. But do you know how many people are walking around with T-shirts of both Malcolm X and Che Guevara and a number of other civil rights leaders back in the day, leaders of different types of movement and all of that? Because I guess Che Guevara would be more a leader of the labor movement and things of that nature. But if you would ask these people, it comes back to one of your favorite topics about education. If you would ask them to even give you a little bit of the history, I'm not even saying a full history or a full dissertation, but just a little bit of the history of these individuals, quite a few of them would be lost and would not be able to tell you other than they thought that it was a cool image or an image that they felt was representative of something or another that they wanted to put on their body and everything, but they would have no idea of the even the viewpoints of some of these individuals from back in the day. They just thought that they were being cool.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. But there's no sense in banning them. It's like the latest banning that goes on is actually Facebook and YouTube. Okay. And like Mark, as you know, we got banned for a week on our whole network on, what was it, YouTube or Facebook? YouTube. Okay. And why did we do that? Because we were discussing COVID-19. I'm not kidding. Okay. You're discussing COVID-19 and we got banned for a week. So what YouTube did is click. They turned off our network for a week. That was the punishment. Then they turn us back on. And I'm going like, you can't be serious. So the real problem I'm having with banned books is it's expanding. In other words, it's a universe that's expanding into all forms of speech and who's making these decisions. In other words, what you can read, what you can't read. And I guess when I was younger, Bill, when I was in college, there were, to my knowledge, there was no banned books. So there wasn't like go to a library or even a law library. Oh, you can't read that book because of X.
And if you're, the Wall Street Journal has had a multi-part series on Facebook's culture and their algorithms on how they're identifying offensive things. I mean, I don't think anybody actually looked at your COVID discussion. They just saw the transcript. A computer said COVID-19. Uh-oh. This guy's not an expert. Get rid of him. Yeah. No. Well, but when we have these algorithms, I mean, man, nobody's in charge.
Right. Yeah, the bots are making the decision. If you're listening to our show, there's some place that's actually automatically transcribed. Okay. So the thing is, when I'm traveling some places or I'm busy with bouncing around people, I can actually watch the show and the transcription will go underneath. They transcribe our words automatically, so you can actually read it. Well, the problem is apparently one of the bots saw COVID-19. Okay, COVID-19 sends it to an algorithm saying, "Oh, they're discussing COVID-19. We're not sure if they're saying the right things," and bang, they shut down our network for a week.
Have you ever looked at any of those transcripts? Because I've actually gotten Otter, and I've gotten a couple of the other ones as well, and I can tell you that their accuracy rates are not all that great. Because they will sit there, and you will be sitting there going like, "That is not what I said. That is not even an interpretation of what I said." Because sometimes the bots are like totally misspelling words, totally misspelling concepts, and a whole 9 yards and everything. So I've definitely gone back there, and I'm gone like in some cases you can't even make sense of the sentences because they don't even make structural sense, or they don't make any sense at all. And you're going like, how is the bot doing this? Because the bots are listening for certain keywords and certain words that they are familiar with, and they don't always translate all that well and everything. So like I said, it's not just a simple misspelling, because I know that I've been guilty of that. Humans are guilty of making simple mistakes, because I remember helping run a program and definitely misspelled a person's name. It was not done maliciously or any kind of way of that nature. It was just human error. But some of these errors that I see on the bots are way past like a love versus love, meaning an LOV versus LUV, or a spelling of like Mark MARC versus MARK. I'm talking about like some very blatant misspellings and some very bad misconcepts in the way that they translate. So whoever's doing this algorithms and programming, I think that they need to do a better job. You're talking about other countries really quickly. I did just really look up Canada. Canada banned some books as well over the history, and some of those were like the ones you mentioned. They were Mein Kampf, but they also banned The Handmaid's Tale, which was shot right here in North Carolina. And part of the reason they banned that was because of what they considered profane language, anti-Christian overtones, violence, and sexual degradation. And that is why that book was widely challenged, mainly by parents of high school age kids in that particular community in Canada. And another one was Such Is My Beloved, which is a book that was written in 1972 by in 1972, two Christian ministers tried to get this novel removed from a high school in Huntsville, Ontario, on the basis of its depiction of prostitution and the use of quote unquote strong language. So a lot of times it's around the language, it's around other things like that. And like I said, they even did Of Mice and Man as well. So in the mid-90s, this book's presence in the Alberta curriculum was challenged as part of a petition to withdraw books that demean or profane the name of God and Jesus Christ. So they were feeling that it was very anti-Christian and anti-religious in that sense, which, that is definitely considered a classic piece of work in terms of literature. But there were folks that wanted to take it out for those reasons. And another book was one called Persepolis, which is apparently very challenged in Canada on a regular basis, and it is usually challenged because of its violent content. So, like I said, a lot of times these things are left up to people's various interpretations. Another one that I remember reading, I think I have it in the house somewhere, is Brave New World. So
yeah, Aldous Huxley, I saw that. Yeah, it was. It's on ban list, but I'm just wondering who's making the decisions. What criteria are they using? And then when they talk about all this stuff, well, it's violent, and I'm going, well, look at television tonight. I mean, if you go to any of these TV stations, all you see is like violence, people killing each other. Netflix is like turned into. We're trying not to watch it anymore because if you look at it, it's all dark violence. I mean, seriously, it's in other words, an insane violence. They had this one called The Defeated about Berlin. I don't know if you ever saw that. In other words, where the U.S. came and they took over Berlin, and then the Russians and the French, and everybody's out killing each other. I mean, it's almost like blood, violence, depression nightly. Okay, and it's on. But Netflix you pay for. The other ones are free, but it goes on every night. And there's no conversation there about, well, why don't you ban, the major networks and Netflix and all these other things? No conversation there. But here's a book. Okay, so you got to take the book. Here we go. We'll ban this one, Richard the Millionaire, because if you read it, no, we won't ban it, Bill. If you read it, you actually may be rich and successful someday. Yeah. Okay, and the thing is, who's making this determination of these books?
Look, we do have, in fairness, we do have some sort of, in most countries, there is some sort of censorship body that, for example, will say this movie, like Pulp Fiction, for example, you can't watch it unless you're over 18 or whatever the age group is that they say, right? So we normally do have that, and they will also say that certain things just can't be shown. Certain depictions, certain things can't be sort of clearly explained and graphically described in a book. And some of those things, as I said, if it comes to the Atticus Cookbook, and by the way, the reason I've never read it is because it remains banned in Australia, so I've never had the chance to actually read it.
Really?
And I'd get the book, not because I plan on blowing anything up, but because I want to know what's so controversial that's in it. And that's the other thing that you end up doing, is that if you ban something, people are going to want to know what's in the book. They're going to go out of their way to try and find it so that they can, so they can read what's in it. So, and look, as I said, like say with Mein Kampf, I can understand why, in the aftermath of that, really benighted time in Germany's history and its surrounding countries, why that book would be heavily restricted or outright banned for a period of time. But you'd say that about anything, coming out of a country that's had, this horrible thing happen in that country. But, in 2021, do we still want to ban that book? And there are some parts of the world that heavily ban Karl Marx and Engels books. Now, personally, and I'll again say, I actually don't support any of their ideas. But the reason why I know I don't support them is because I've read a lot of their books.
Really? Yeah, well, and that they wrote Das Kapital. So
Das Kapital was the first one of
series of books.
Karl Marx's books.
Right, but it was economic. From what I understand, his books, and I read them a long time ago, were economic theory. In other words, it was his viewpoints on economics. It's like saying, "Oh, I'm going to ban Adam Smith." I mean, I wouldn't ban Adam Smith. I'd ban Atlas Shrugged because it's fiction. 1,000 pages of fiction. But no, why are you banning any of these books? That's what gets me. I just don't see banning to be a solution.
Another one, of course, is the Marquis de Sade. So he's written some pretty.
He's got the Marx Engels reader.
Yes, and you can see I've tabbed certain areas here for future reference.
Is that banned book?
No, well, this is my personal.
All right.
Who knows? It might be banned. Bill may have a banned book, and what happens in that regard. But Nick, you were earlier saying that.
Sorry. I just finished my sentence of what I was saying before. So the Marquis de Sade, he wrote he wrote a number of books where he described some of the things that he was doing. And of course, he was in jail for a period of time in France, where he actually wrote some of his more controversial books. Some of them were banned, some of them have been unbanned, just depends on where you are. But I tend to say, if you live in a country, especially the United States, where you have a First Amendment, restrictions on being able to access material should be very few and far between.
Right.
The thing that I was going to bring up, you actually said that you did not remember hearing growing up about banned books, Nick, and everything.
Correct.
And they said that these challenges often come from parent groups, governments, religious school districts, and even libraries. And guess what? I went down here and I found that there were some books that were banned even as far back as the 50s. I'm sure there were some before then, but one of the books that was banned, are y'all ready for this? The Wizard of Oz. So The Wizard of Oz was banned back in the 50s. And see, they were even asking what could be offensive about this classic children's novel, but it turns out that most of the complaints have to do with the book's presentation of a strong female protagonist and also the witchcraft, because there is witchcraft with
there's witchcraft,
the Wizard
right.
of Oz and all of that. So that was the reason that it was raised as an issue back then. Lady Chatterley's Lover was one back in the 50s, as was George Orwell's 1984.
Yeah.
And that was one that was from the 50s as well. And of course, Lolita, which deals a lot with sexuality and things along that nature, and The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. So that was one that was banned as well because of some depictions of everything from slavery to bondage to a number of other things. But the book often incites claims of racism, even though because of the N-word, and a lot of people are very much upset with that N-word. So that is the reason that that book was banned. And also The Sun Also Rises, which is a classic Ernest Hemingway book, and it is frequently taught in English classes. But, you know, while it's considered a masterpiece, there are folks that got upset there. The novel was apparently burned in Germany after publication, but also banned later in the United States for its portrayal of promiscuity and a decadent, frivolous lifestyle. So they felt that there was too much of that rich lifestyle that was being covered in that particular book. If we want to go to the 60s, we can look at The Catcher in the Rye being banned, as well as John Updike's Rabbit Run. So that was another book that was banned in the 60s for various reasons, including Updike's portrayal around sexual activities and things of that nature, and even extramarital affairs and things that are put in.
What would you ban a book for describing slavery? Like, if you really want people to understand the horrors of slavery and what that actually entails, graphically describing it and talking about what human beings did to people for most of human history, I think it's a pretty important thing to do. You would want people to know this is what it actually means. I mean, like when I talk about why socialism is a really bad idea, I can go into quite graphic detail about what that actually means. And normally, even with panelists that, you know, on some of our other shows, they kind of get a bit stuck going, well, actually, that's not what I'm looking for. That's not what I'm describing. And I'm like, yes, but that's what when you say socialism, that's what it means. Which is how I get back to us saying, well, that's not really what people are wanting when they say socialism. They just want there to be more social funding of some services. But, you know, it's really important that we actually understand what we're talking about with a lot of these subjects.
No, I agree with you. And I mean, one of the classic books, some people would even say that it is a book that has been used by people that are very radical in their viewpoints and everything. And that is the book Catch-22, which is definitely about one is a satire, and a lot of times I don't know that people always understand even what satire is, and they sometimes take satire to be very like literal and things of that nature. So I do sometimes think that people even misinterpret what satire is, and as one that has tried to write satire, sometimes I know that it can be misinterpreted and things along those lines. But that novel was banned in Ohio in 1972 because of its indecent language. But the book stands out to some people as a subversive novel because of its themes about resisting and questioning authority, because it is about a military person that actually tries to find a way to be relieved of his duty. Some people might even say that it was a model for the Klinger person, even though that was more around him dressing up and everything. But some people may see that as a model to what was going on in the famous TV series MASH and all of that, because it was something similar in that regard. He was trying to find a way out of his military service. So definitely there are some folks that might see that as a very subversive kind of quality, but a lot of other people would read it as just a classic novel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but yeah, Bill.
the fact that though when you ban a book, it makes it the forbidden fruit.
Exactly.
And on Amazon, I think there's 12 million books that are available. As long as Amazon doesn't ban it, you're going to be able to get it.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
Well,
So
even if they do ban it, like personally, like I've bought recently, and probably after some of our conversations, I'm going to be buying a lot more of these contentious books just so I've got a copy of them, in case they're no longer available. But the thing is that I may not necessarily want to buy those books from Amazon where there's a record of me having bought them. I might want to go down to the actual bookstore and pay for it in cash. That stuff that still actually exists, rather than using my credit card, so there really isn't a record of me having bought the book.
yeah, I was going to say that then they keep track of you, Shaquille, and then they know that this guy is a troublemaker, and they'll push you to the government authorities to say you got to watch this guy because you know.
I think
that's
the world
what
already
Fox
knows
is.
I'm a troublemaker, so that's okay.
Yeah, in other words, he's buying all these books. Okay, hence he's going to cause some issues. So now let's go ahead and start tracking them, and that of course they can do today. But I agree with you, Bill. If it's available on Amazon, then it's not really banned. And the way I look at it, if a school board says, "Hey, I'm going to pull it from my library," like there was an elementary school I used to teach at. If they pulled all the books in the library, I really don't care. But the thing is, if you say it's just banned, completely and obliterated, then I have a real problem with that. In other words, at university level, you should be able to read all the stupid banned books.
Let me
Go to college.
let me just
Read
say something.
whatever you want.
When you make the comment that if it's available on Amazon, that it's not really banned. Okay, that's sure. I'll accept that. But
Probably true.
well, sure, but a lot of people don't have the financial capacity. We've talked about on previous shows today about what percentage of Americans don't have $400. So what are they going to do? Spend $30 or $40 buying a book that's banned? But the more important part of that is if you go to a library and you happen to be interested in a particular subject, you will have a look, not just what I normally would do is I won't just go to the author of that book that I want to get out. I would also look at all the books surrounding it to see if there's anything there that takes my fancy, and I'll sort of read a few pages and go, okay, I might take this book as well, and that sort of stuff. If the book's not there in the first place, I don't know it's banned because I haven't heard of it.
Right.
And so that's a lot of damage that we do to our young people who are actually interested in a particular subject matter, but can't find anything out about it. So if I give a really good example of this, I was actually at my local library, and I don't generally go to my local library that often, but I didn't have a copy of Wealth of Nations, and there was something in it that I wanted to quote, and I just didn't have a copy with me at this house. So I went down there, and I found that there wasn't a single book at all written by any economist, not even Karl Marx. I was quite surprised to find. And then I looked, and there was economic theory from a feminist perspective. And there was one book on Adam Smith, and it was called Adam Smith's Mother, and how women. And I'm sort of looking at this, just going, look, if I was 14 or 15, and I was just getting interested in economic theory, where would I go? Now, luckily for me, where I grew up was very, very close to the State Library of New South Wales, which is one of the largest libraries in Australia, and it was at that time a full reference library. So I was able to get lost in there and find all sorts of books on all sorts of different topics. But, the idea that there's so many kids that want to go to a library and actually read something and the information's not there and they don't know where to look because they haven't heard of the concepts in the first place, I think it's deplorable. And we should be saying to our local libraries, hey, this is not acceptable.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's why I would say on public libraries and universities, a whole different cat. But if you have elementary school, they have libraries at some of these schools. They can do what they want in terms of if they want to have no books, fine. Actually, at University of North Carolina State University, there are no books in the library. What do you mean there's no books in the library? What they literally did is they stored them in a chamber that you have to press electronics to get the books to come up, and then they'll get to you. But you can't go thumb through the books at North Carolina State University. It has a very unique library for those who ever happen to go there. Then it's a huge library. What are all these rooms? There are all these rooms, meeting rooms. I'm serious. They must have 200,000 square foot meeting rooms. And then the library is all stuck in a chamber that you have to specifically order the book. Well, what's the problem with that? The problem is what you just said, Shaquille. When I used to go to the library, you'd like to thumb through and see what's available. You can't do that anymore, at least at North Carolina State University. I don't think they were thinking about that. They were just thinking that this is how we're going to do the library. And that's kind of the way it is. But with that in mind, of course, there can be a certain amount of books that are banned, but you wouldn't even know about it. In other words, I don't know what books are banned and what aren't because you won't know about. But today, because of the internet, they put the list out. Here are the banned books, and if
they have to put a list out, because if it's banned in such a way that it's illegal for you to own it, if they don't tell you it's illegal for you to own it, then you can't really be prosecuted for having owned something that you weren't. The other thing is, like, if as far as I know, if you buy a book that you're not sure about that's coming from one of the major booksellers, Amazon, Booktopia, like some of those places, I believe it's up to them to make sure that you don't get something that's banned in your country. I don't think that you as the buyer are actually responsible for that. But that may or may not be true. I mean, you might get prosecuted for attempting to import something that's banned.
Yeah,
I mean, it's...
A question for both of y'all is, what do you say when there are people that want to ban books or maybe ban philosophies because they do not necessarily agree with them? We've talked on this show a couple of times about critical race theory, and there's another term that is actually a science fiction term that is out now as well, and it's called Afrofuturism. It was actually a term coined by Mark Derry in his 1984 essay Back to the Future, and it's about speculative fiction that treats African American themes and addresses African American concerns in the context of the 20th century technoculture and more generally African American science fiction. So it is a new form of science fiction that is out there, as far as I know, but they do have different themes, even around race and race relations and things of that nature. So I don't know whether any of these books have been banned yet, but it would not surprise me if they don't get banned, because they are putting out a viewpoint that is different than quote unquote mainstream viewpoint. So what are your thoughts about these new forms of literature that are out there as well? And should they have the freedom to be talked about also in that court of public opinion?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, my thinking is sure. Yeah, I mean, that's the whole idea of the free speech, is that you throw things out and let people read them and make their own decisions about them. So rather than say, oh, you can't listen to this, you can't listen to that. I mean, who's making that decision for you? So, if somebody has different theories or different viewpoints on it, I think they should be able to bring those viewpoints forward. And if you're not, then what you're doing is you're restricting access, which is not what our Constitution was based on. It was actually based on freedom of speech, so that you could actually listen to different viewpoints, no matter, like I said, I'll read Das Kapital, and I'll listen to Karl Marx rant and rave. I'll listen to Adam Smith rant and rave. Okay, but the thing is, we're allowed to read both of them. In other words, it's not like, well, you can only listen to Adam Smith or listen to Das Kapital. And frankly, even though I don't like Atlas Shrugged, only because she's a fiction writer writing my economics, and I'm an intellectual snob, and I don't read fiction writers I'd rather get my economics from a person who has a PhD in economics, than a person who's a fiction writer. But if you're free to read Atlas Slugged or whatever it is, I just don't read it. 1,000 pages. I'm not going to read that.
You've brought up books like written by
that lady.
You've brought up books written by Voltaire in the past, and that's how I would say to read it, because it's philosophy. But let's just say though, that, Mark, I think that when it comes to what's happening in schools, you may find that the way to solve this issue between critical race theory and all these different issues is that parents would have to opt in, or at least should be able to opt their children out of certain things. So, for example, if you're going to a secular school in Australia that does provide religious studies, you're not going to force the Jewish kids to go and learn about Islam, right? You would simply have a Jewish class for them. You would have a Catholic class for the Catholics. You'd have an Anglican class for the Anglicans, and so on and so forth, just for the religious part of the curriculum. So I think that you may find yourself in the same position, that if there is a theory that all people of all minority groups are oppressed by the majority, That, I think, is something that if you want your children to learn that, you should be able to say, yep, I'm opting my child into that. I want my child to believe that they are victimized by centuries of oppression. Or you may be able to say, look, I don't think that that's a healthy thing for my child to learn. I don't want them learning that. I want them to learn that, about freedom and liberty and, all these other things. So I think that that's probably the way to deal with it, as opposed to saying we should ban a particular concept or whatever. But it's also not really fair to force, for example, critical race theory ideas from the United States into the school curriculum in Australia. The very first law that we have in Australia is against slavery. Now, our treatment of our Indigenous people has not been good, right? We have a pretty poor record on it. But we literally did not have slaves in this country. It was literally the first law that we had. So for Australian school students to have to learn about critical race theory issues that affect the mostly southern states of the United States just doesn't make any sense. And I think that Australian kids should be learning other things. So again, I think that people should be able to have a bit more say and a bit more control over the materials that their children are exposed to.
Shaq, this is exactly the what's going on in the state of Virginia governor's race right now. The Democrat says the parents should have nothing to say about what the curriculum is. And the Republican candidate is, arguing just the opposite, that parents have a huge say.
Right.
So, maybe it's going to be fought out on a state-by-state basis.
I think that this argument is already sort of settled. How families raise their children is not the business of the state. It never has been the business of the state. Hang on, Mark, hang on. So it is actually a constitutional issue at its core. If you're telling me that I must have my children learn something and it's against the will of the parents, that is completely unconstitutional. But more importantly, for the wider implications for the world, it's against the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The education that your children receive is supposed to be determined by the parents. That's Article 26, I believe, of the UN Declaration. So, we've had centuries prior to the Declaration of Human Rights. We've had centuries of various fights that we've had over all sorts of different issues about how to run our societies properly, whether it be complete laissez-faire economics, which didn't work out very well for a lot of people. And we had philosophers that used to say, well, the weak that die, who cares, right? That's they're lesser forms of humans and things like that. And great philosophers, Aristotle, Plato, Socrates, all used to say those sorts of things, often as justifications for slavery as well. Well, we as society and we as humans have evolved to a point where we say, actually, that's not okay. And what did we determine? We determined that people were entitled to healthcare, education, all these other things. We also determined they were entitled to certain protections. We also determined that they were required to contribute to society or to the society that provides them with those protections. Freedom of speech, freedom against torture, all of those sorts of things. And if you ever actually read the Declaration, it sets all these out. But that particular article, as I said, I believe it's Article 26, Section 3 of that article specifically says that the education that children receive should be determined by the parents, not by the state. And that's something that the US signed on to, by the way.
It should be, but a lot of times it isn't. I mean, you want to talk about things that are banned and things that are not banned and everything. There's a lot of times where it comes up in conversations is around the concept of prayer in school and whether we should have prayer in school or not. I'm actually a fan of having what is kind of like a time that people can maybe pray to whoever their belief system is and things of that nature. But there have been some people that have pushed for specific kinds of prayers in schools and things of that nature. But I have no problem with people that want to have like a moment of silence or a moment of reflection, whatever you want to call it, that people can have their spiritual connection in whatever way that will be. But I do know that this has been a debate that has been going on for decades, and it even came up in one of the banned books, because I think that was part of the things that was brought up even when Salman Rushdie was having his book banned, because that was a book that was banned as well, and part of that was because of religious viewpoints and things of that nature, and there were certain religions that felt that it was an attack on them. So that was one of the things that I was going to add. And when it comes to just a real other quick point, because I was actually going to bring it up to y'all on Economics Monday, because I was watching it and everything, when it comes to even the concept of critical race theory and economics and things along those lines, a lot of times we don't even teach the different viewpoints that existed, which also need to be taught. And sometimes there are people within that to do that. But let's be real. There were people that were very much tied to different attitudes around economics, even in the African American community. Booker T. Washington did not necessarily agree with his counterpart as well, W.E.B. Du Bois. And Marcus Garvey had a whole nother attitude. He wanted to take everybody back to Africa. But that was a whole viewpoint discussion that was going on way back in like the 50s. And the same thing can be said in the 60s with Martin Luther King and Malcolm X. And those kind of different viewpoints, and including different viewpoints around economics, should be taught in our school system.
Yeah, well, I think getting more viewpoints, the better off people are going to be. And in terms of prayers in school, I went to Catholic school, so prayer was in school, period, the end. In other words, it wasn't like there was a big argument. But I guess in public schools, it is a big argument. In other words, it's a big political thing. But I agree with Shaq that you should, right now, the education should be determined by the local school boards and the local people that are there. And if you don't like it, that's the reason you pick up and you move, you know. But if you
vote out or vote
I
out,
don't think it should be
or vote a new school board, Bill.
Yeah.
But
I don't think it should be by local school boards. I really don't.
then who's going to do it?
Well, I think the parents should be able to do it. I think.
Well, that's the parents. I assume it's the parents.
No, but hang on. I think on an individual basis. So for example, you just went to the financial literacy thing by the U.S. Treasury, who talks about racial issues and climate change. The same as Sierra Club talks about racial issues, transgenderism, and abortion, and they're supposed to be an environmental group,
Right.
So if I don't believe that racism, that mathematics is racism, then let's have, schools normally have multiple classes for different subjects, right? So you've got the students that are not so good at maths are in one class, students that are really good at maths and excel at it are in another class, etc. So parents should be able to just simply sit there and say, absolutely. I believe that mathematics shows, it's just a white supremacist idea. I don't want my child to learn about that. I would prefer them to learn that they've been oppressed. Fine, no problems. It's your child, okay? Right. But don't make my child learn that. If I say, I want my child to learn that 1 + 1 = 2 and not equals a rainbow, then let me expose my children to that information.
Yeah. I mean, but again, it would be up to the parents and the school boards to make those decisions.
Well, the school boards clearly aren't doing that right now, are they?
Reportedly are elected by the parents.
Well, what's happening at the moment is if you go in and you're against transgenderism being taught or critical race theory being taught, you're a domestic terrorist. That's the equivalent of flying a plane into a building, apparently. So, all you're going to do is you're going to force parents to say, you know what, I'm ripping my kids out of school and I'm going to homeschool them. Or those that have got a bit more financial resources will say, you know what, let's get our kids privately tutored because we can't afford private school, but private tutors may not be quite as expensive. Or, 10 parents can get together and get their own tutors in to teach their kids, collectively and split the cost between them. And that's what you're going to end up having. You're going to end up dividing the community even more because you're not allowing people to have any kind of say or any sort of sway over their life and their children's lives.
Right. Well, what is the objection to reading books like this?
I have no objection.
I know you don't have an objection. Like, why isn't this important? I go like this. I'm going like, there's certain good books that are out there. Here's another one, The Intelligent Investor by Graham. I mean, there are certain books out there that should be what I call
the must read,
the Marx Engels reader. But see, the thing is, there are certain books that should be promoted books. In other words, books that will help you no matter what. Why don't our school boards and our education institutions do that? We had a great conversation earlier. I didn't know Sharon was actually trying to get books like yours, Bill, on into the education system. That's like my goal but I got to get to the leaders and shake them up a little bit to make a difference, because books like that should be part of the curriculum in elementary school, middle school, and high school. Okay. Right. Instead, that's not what's happening. Instead, they're onto this whole different political agenda, which isn't going to make a difference in their lives. I'm sorry,
But if you want to teach civics, then teach civics properly. I mean, when I come to America and I say to people, okay, so you've got this view, you've got that view, and they're very passionate about it. America's a racist country. It always has been. It was founded racist. But okay, cool. So do you agree with the Federalists or the Anti-Federalists? And people just look at me blankly and go, what are you talking about? I'm like, you know nothing about the way that your country was founded. You know nothing about what the arguments were at the foundation of your country and why some things were allowed and why some things weren't, what the debates were. And, you know, John Adams versus Thomas Jefferson and all those, you know, the founding fathers' ideals. But yet you're so critical of the country. There's this impression, especially in US media, mainstream media, that there is really no redeeming quality that the United States has. That there's nothing good, there's nothing positive about the United States. And I'm really kind of bewildered by that, because it's like, do you have any idea how you were founded, what it was about? No country ever lives up to its ideals all of the time, right? Every country has got some parts of its history that are perhaps not so good. But, you know, I think very few countries are founded on such great ideals at their core. And if you're not prepared to teach your kids that stuff, heaven help trying to teach them anything else. And the reality is, it's not just in financial literacy. The fact of the matter is that for the last probably decade or so, we have a generation of kids that are graduating out of high schools with worse academic results in sciences, maths, English, all of those subjects, than not just their parents did, but that their grandparents did. Now, that's the first time in history, that in recorded history, where that's happened outside of a war situation. And we're talking about American kids, Australian kids, Canadian kids, whose grandparents were in World War I or World War II, whose grandparents were, you know, coming out of those kinds of conditions, and their grandparents can read and add up and have better literacy skills than what their grandchildren do in 2021. I mean, that's just appalling. So I think the reflection on our education system is a very poor one. And banning books, putting in things like critical race theory, Mark, I know that you're an advocate of it. I really don't like it. But, you know, putting all this stuff in and not teaching kids how to add up without a calculator, you know, I mean,
well, I agree with the fact that we need to teach basic skills like financial literacy and how to do a calculator and things of that nature, and even some of the histories of the world. So it's not so much that I am a fan of all the details of critical race theory. I'm just a fan, as I've told you before, of making sure that we are definitely teaching a lot of the history of America, and meaning that we're willing to acknowledge the warts that existed while also understanding the principles you're talking about. But I do think that those principles are important to talk about and things of that nature. I use the example, hold on a second. I use the example of Marcus Garvey versus Booker T. Washington. Many people have no clue who either Marcus Garvey or Booker T. Washington is, or for that matter, W.E.B. Du Bois, who is actually Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois. They went through that whole argument of the talented 10th and whether it needed to be the kind of the elite that were the ones that were ruling society in the African American community. So a lot of people don't even know that discussion. They don't know who Floyd McKissick is. They don't know a lot of other people. So I think that is stuff that needs to be taught. And I'm just using those as some examples. They also don't know about the movement to go back to Africa, which Marcus Garvey talked about several decades ago and everything, and which is now back in the news. Let me finish real quickly. And which is now back in the news because Stevie Wonder is talking about going back. And part of the reason he's talking about going back is because he feels that he wants to see his grandchildren have a better view of society and a better view, because he feels that they will have a better economic background if they move to Ghana. And he's actually talked about it. David Chappelle, who I mentioned on our news program, has even said recently that he's considering moving as well, because he says that he wants to see this nation smile again, and he wants to see it before I leave and travel and move to Ghana, because he's already said that he's going to move that. And he says he plans to make that move because he doesn't want to see his children's children have to say, oh, please like me, please respect me, please know that I am important, please value me. So he does find that there is some racism that exists in this society that he is not too pleased with.
Okay, Mark, so I'm not going to get into a race debate. The debate is about whether we should ban books. And if you want to teach your kids stuff, that's fine. Okay, I just don't think you should be able to compel somebody else to do that. No, now, if I want my children to read this, my future children, if I ever have them, if I want them to read this, I should be able to choose to say, this is what I want my kids taught in year 9. What they're doing now, if you want to know what financial literacy looks like in the United States at the moment, it is well, the banking system is racist. And this is what it all comes down to. They don't teach people how to write a check. And by the way, when I was in year 9, the guy who actually taught me, the teacher that taught me how to write a check, was a black guy from America who had moved to Australia. Okay, so that was the guy who taught us, and I'm not sure if you do it in America, but we cross our checks to say they're not negotiable, which means it can't be split over to somebody else. So, I had no idea at year 9 that that's what you did. And as I said, checks aren't really used very much in this country. It's not like it is in the States. So, this was information that I wanted to learn. Now, it would be, undoubtedly, well, checkbooks were created by white people and therefore it's racist. Now, look, again, Mark,
I've never heard anybody ever say that.
I'm saying that you can't teach all of that stuff. That's fine. Teach it to those parents. Teach it to the children of parents who want that taught to their kids. But don't force everybody else to learn it as well.
Well, the thing is, one thing we should do is add an F to STEM. There's this big push on science, technology, engineering, and math. Add finance to it, because the thing is, without that, the rest of the engine just doesn't run. And we're not doing that. We'll emphasize science, technology, engineering, math. But what happens to finance? It's like completely ignored, yet it runs the entire engine. And then we just got to get away from, I hate to say it, Shakespeare. I mean, the thing is, choice. I can watch Shakespeare, I can read this book. Read this book. Actually, less pages. And the thing is, it's in English as opposed to Old English.
It's in Polish, too.
It's in Polish, too. It'll actually help you.
But it is in American English. It is in American English, so he leaves the U out of words like colours. That's the only criticism. The thing is, remember if you go back, well before my time, they had home economics courses, as part of your school curriculum, where you learn how to cook. You try asking a Gen Z to cook something. I mean, good luck. Right, so I mean, we're not teaching our kids how to survive without their parents at all. We're not teaching them how to do anything for themselves.
Right. Yeah, and the thing is, we just need to revamp our education system. It was great having Sharon on earlier about her fight in Arizona to actually get them to do it, and her fight against basically the National Education Association goes, we don't want to do it except the way that we've done it in the past, which means let's ignore this altogether. In terms of banned books, I know that's an issue, but I'd like to see some promoted books. Because there's some books like what Bill puts out makes a difference. What Sharon puts out makes a difference. And these books should be promoted. They're not. It really is a big problem in the United States because we're not going to go anywhere unless the education issues are solved. And with that, I'd like to thank everybody for Media Monday. We're at the hour. We will see you next week, and we'll have a new topic. It won't be banned books. We'll find something else. We'll see you next week on Media Monday.